Okay, I promised to finish up chapter 6 with a podcast. I'm just showing this slide first because it's a review of the synthesis process of protein, remembering that transcription occurs in the nucleus and translation occurs in the ribosome and the cytoplasm. So the communicators are the RNA, the messenger RNA, which carries the exact copy of the DNA to the ribosome, and the tRNA, which carries the amino acids from the cell interior to the ribosome to rebuild the protein in the exact order. So that was a simple review from the first part of this chapter. The only parts we didn't get covered in class were how the digestion of protein occurs. So we just barely started it, but just to go into a little more detail, you can remember that the stomach and the small intestine are the main locations of protein digestion. And you notice here that there are enzymes and hormones and acids. So because the peptide bond, which is the bond between each amino acid, is so difficult to break, it requires pepsin as the enzyme and hydrochloric acid as the acid. And this is in the stomach. And then when it's been partially broken down in the stomach, the breakdown is completed in the small intestine from the pancreatic proteases, which are enzymes released by the pancreas to the small intestine to break down the remainder of the amino acid peptide bonds. The hormone gastrin is what stimulates the production of the acid, and the acid is what stimulates the activation of pepsin. So all these are integrated. And then cholecystokinin, the other hormone, is the hormone that triggers the release of this pancreatic enzyme. So these hormones are always precursors to the action that's going to happen. I think we showed really briefly in class that some of the digestion does start even with cooking. So if you have a protein food, meat, obviously we don't usually eat raw meat or raw beans. We cook them. Eggs, you shouldn't eat raw because of salmonella. So anyway, we cook them and get some breakdown of the amino acid denaturation. And then, as we said, the gastrin hormone stimulates the hydrochloric acid, which comes from the cells of the stomach. And then the pepsinogen, which is a proenzyme, it's not active, is released. Then this is converted by the acid to pepsin, which is the active enzyme. So now these polypeptide bonds, as you can see in this picture, can be broken into peptides, like short chain or just individual amino acids. So that's mostly going on in the stomach and small intestine. Here's just a picture. You can watch this video, but it just shows a very simple idea that pepsin is the active form. So when pepsinogen, which is released by the cells of the stomach, it has about, I don't know if I get a small portion of this protein that actually has to be removed so that it can become pepsin. So the hydrochloric acid even works on this protein to activate the enzyme. So this pepsinogen is a protein, and it's also an enzyme to break down other proteins. So just to know that hydrochloric acid is pretty important. So if you don't have a good pH in your stomach, you could lose out on digestion of protein. And then the small intestine, we just already showed that. So just the review is that CCK releases from the walls of the small intestine to trigger the pancreas to release enzymes, and then the peptides break down to the final amino acid. And this just shows a cleavage site, so where some of these peptide bonds are being broken by these enzymes. So then we have the absorption. So it's quickly, now that the peptides are down to amino acids, they can quickly move into the villi, microvilli, and into the enterocytes along the lining of the small intestine. Once they are absorbed into the small intestine, they'll be used to build new proteins, as we saw, or they'll be transferred to the liver through the hepatic portal system so that it can be stored for future use. And if for some reason you're not eating enough carbohydrate or fat, it can be used for energy. So that has three possibilities. And here's just another schematic of what we just talked about. I don't think there's anything new in here. Just that, well, again, when we chew food, that helps, of course, break down the surface area so that when it does hit the stomach, there's more space for these enzymes to work and the hydrochloric acid to work. So what is protein doing in our body? So it's got so the protein All right, if this is okay, so here we're just continuing with a concept map. This shows all the different functions of protein in the body. So we'll look at some slides for each one of these, but just noticing that these basic amino acid components can be used for maintaining fluid balance, contributing to acid and base balance. It can contribute hydrogen to maintain a pH that's neutral. It can form hormones and enzymes. It can also contribute to immune function. So the B cells and T cells to identify and destroy pathogens, and it can provide energy. So if we have not enough energy from carbohydrate and fat. And this one's interesting because this shows the turnover and the synthesis and breakdown. So if you have amino acids that are storing in your cells or in your liver, this is like our amino acid pool. So we have a huge variety of amino acids that can then, you can use these amino acids to make some of the neurotransmitters that are in our brain. They can also be used for the enzymes and antibodies. They can be made to be stored. They can be stored as fat. They can also be removed and used for energy, to make glucose for energy. And all these processes do require the excretion of the nitrogen. So once you've made these products, you don't necessarily you have a byproduct from that digestion, the metabolism, which is ammonia. So the smell of your urine is caused by this ammonia, and which we excrete as urea. So that's one of the reasons we have that scent to our urine. So the maintaining the balance, then you can see that if there's not enough protein in your blood vessels, protein helps maintain fluid balance because the water needs to stay equal inside and outside of the blood arteries and veins. So if you don't have enough protein, enough solutes like sodium, potassium, other minerals inside your blood, then the water will move out to the tissues to try to equalize the solute and the solvent levels because it can easily diffuse through the cell membrane. So you need protein, you need minerals to hold the water in your blood, otherwise you get edema or swelling in your other tissues. One of the other functions of protein is for transport. So it is one of the receptors on the cell. So on the cell wall, the only way that potassium, sodium, and chloride and some of these other minerals can move in and out of your cell is by the protein receptors that allow them in and out. They also can transport ions. They can also transport nutrients. They can transport oxygen, fats. And in this case, they also transfer B12. So something called, you can watch this video later, but this pernicious anemia is a type of anemia that's not from an iron deficiency, but it's from a B12 deficiency. So if you do not have this particular protein that you need to attach to B12 so that it can be absorbed, so B12 is one vitamin that needs a little tag to be attached to it, then you could easily have pernicious anemia, which has symptoms similar to beriberi and pellagra, where you have nerve numbness, and it can eventually destroy your brain, your cognitive ability. So it's a pretty important vitamin. So here's the example of how amino acids that has hydrogen. It can contribute hydrogen if it's too much pH, too little pH. It can contribute or collect hydrogen to maintain the pH of the blood or inside the cells. It is the source of, it is the constituent of an enzyme. So here the enzyme, you wonder why pepsinogen doesn't get destroyed by the stomach acid. It actually does in some way because that pepsinogen loses a whole portion of its amino acid chain as the pH lowers, so that it becomes an active site for breakdown of other proteins. So basically, you get a protein digesting other proteins. So here we have the fact that it also can kill off other bacteria, like H. pylori is the bacteria that survives in your stomach, and that's why a lot of people have ulcers from this particular bacteria. If you get a foodborne illness, Clostridium botulinum, that's another bacteria that survives in low pHs and can only be killed at very high temperatures. And then norovirus is another virus or small short chain RNA that survives in your stomach pH. There's the hormones. Here's a thyroid hormone. It's an example of a protein. It's a hormone that carries iodine. It's how it attaches iodine, and this is what helps maintain your metabolism inside your cell. The enzyme, as we talked about before, helps break down, digest macronutrients. Here's a picture of the antigens and antibodies that we need to fight off pathogens. And then here's the example of what happens when we are short of fat. Say you've used all your fat storage, you've used all your glycogen storage, you're not really eating much, so now your body can make, genesis means create new glucose. Gluconeogenesis means proteins that are made from into glucose. So as you look at the Krebs cycle and the electron transfer cycle, you have all these amino acids that can jump in anywhere along this line and create ATP. So these amino acids are actually used as an ATP source. And then the other thing that's interesting is that you always think of fats as being something that gives us satiety, but protein also is a very good thing to eat with every meal. So if you just eat an apple for breakfast, you won't feel full for very long. But if you eat apple with cheese or apple with yogurt, something with protein, that will help with your satiety so you won't be as hungry as quickly. This section is about the protein needs, which is part of your homework this time. So basically most people need about 8.8 grams of protein for every kilogram. So you just take your weight in pounds, turn it into kilograms by dividing it by 2.2 to find out your kilograms, and then multiply that by 0.8. So this person needs 56 grams total of protein in a day. If you're an athlete, you might need more, up to 1.7, even 2 sometimes, depending how strenuous your activity is and how much muscle is broken down in your exercise. And then if you look at the total calories, they call it the AMDR. That is 10 to 35%. So if you just count, like say I eat 2,000 calories of food, at least 10% of that, or 200 calories of that, should be protein. But of course, we then want to know how many grams is 200 calories. You just divide 200 by 4 because every gram is 4 calories. That's about 50. We're still at that 50 gram range. So that's how you determine how much protein you need. And then you can measure it in the lab, how much protein you're getting. So what you want is nitrogen balance. Since protein is the only macronutrient that has nitrogen in it, you can measure how much nitrogen you take in and how much you excrete in your urine, and you want it to be about even. In some cases, you might have a negative nitrogen balance where you actually excrete more than you consume. That means you're probably not getting enough nutrients, like you're not getting enough nitrogen for all the needs that your body has. So you should probably need to increase the consumption, because no matter what, you're going to use protein. You're using it, in this case, either to build new cells or for energy. So probably this person is using protein as their energy source. So it mentions it in starvation, very low calorie diets, illness. So if you have a severe burn or an infection, this could be the case. And then positive nitrogen balance would be the opposite, where you consume more than you excrete. And this would be more signified if you're growing or you're pregnant, because you might be consuming a lot of protein, but you're not excreting very much. Where is it all going? It's going into building new tissue. Okay, so that's one way to measure. And then let's look at this one. Let's see. So we are looking at serving sizes now. We had tried to understand earlier this semester, like what is protein serving size. So we talked about an ounce equivalent. So if you think about 1 ounce of meat, what else can you eat? So you could eat 1 egg, 1 ounce of cheese, 1 tablespoon of peanut butter, and these are equivalents to 2 or 3 ounces. But if you want to look at 1 ounce, it'd be 1 egg, 1 tablespoon of peanut butter, and 1 ounce of cheese. So you can get protein in lots of 1 cup of milk also. And if you're not getting enough protein, then there's a couple diseases that you might see or experience if you go like abroad globally. So they call them protein calorie malnutrition, PCM for short, or PEM, protein energy malnutrition. So in a lot of countries, of course, you'll see this because of the insufficiency of food. So the 2 main illnesses are marasmus, which is very similar to someone in this country that might have anorexia. It's basically starvation, where you're just not having enough calories, which means you're also not having enough protein. The other situation could be kwashiorkor, where you actually get enough calories but not enough protein. So that's often seen, they actually call it new baby syndrome, I think it is, first child, okay, the disease that the first child gets when the new child comes. So if the mother has a baby, is nursing her baby, and then she has a second baby, she's going to nurse the second baby. The first baby is going to just get cornmeal, or the cheapest thing they can find, which is going to be low protein. So the first child ends up getting kwashiorkor, and the way you can tell a person has kwashiorkor is by the edema. So there's not enough protein to hold the fluids in the bloodstream or in the tissues, in the cells. So this fluid leaks out into the tissues. And that's why it looks like this child is extremely obese, but actually it's just fluid buildup because of the lack of protein in her body. And marasmus is just a very skin and bones child that has like just not enough calories and very